Okay, we are going to get to your second presentation now of the chapter, and this is on talking about self-presentation, or what's also known as public self. When it comes to your public self, a couple of things to be thinking about there. For example, let's say that someone gives you praise and tells you that you did a wonderful job on a test, you're doing super in a class, you're doing outstanding on your job performance, and those kinds of things. When that happens to you, how do you react? What is your behavior that comes from that? Do you act really modest and say, oh no, I'm just doing my job, or I'm just trying my hardest? Or do you accept that praise and you try to promote yourself by telling the person that's giving you that, yes, I worked really hard, I've tried really hard, those kinds of things. Same thing about being in a situation where sometimes you feel just helpless, where you really don't know how to do something, or you are scared to do it, and so you try to make it appear like you don't have any idea on how to do it. You'll throw up your hands, you'll walk away, you'll get mad, you'll throw a temper tantrum, those kinds of things. Every day we react with the public, and the public reacts with us, our friends, our family, etc. How we act and then how we respond from those actions from people giving back to us is what's known as self-presentation then. So, going through the process of constructing and presenting ourselves to shape other people's impressions and to also achieve an ulterior goal. Oftentimes when it comes to self-presentation, we are very stressful and under a great deal of pressure, which leads to losing this control. For example, again, a lot of times when we're trying to do something where you're going in for a job interview, or you, for the first time, are meeting the parents of someone that you've been dating. Those are very high-pressure situations, very stressful situations. Well, what happens a lot of times in those situations is we mess up. We say the wrong thing, or we spill our drink, or we, act out in a way that, you want to kick yourself afterwards. Those social blunders that we do, those embarrassments that we do, are things that basically all of us go through. But what happens because of those actions inside of our bodies then, we have those physiological changes, the feelings, the emotions that are beginning to build up inside of embarrassment, and of, in some cases, that you're getting all red in the face, or you're getting all shaking, and those kinds of things that can happen to you. And so because of that then, it adds into a new fuel to the fire that causes you even to have a bigger problem. As we become more skilled in being able to automatically deal with the public and deal with the outside world, we begin to learn to pick up certain types of ways to be able to deal with that. And this is, again, one of the areas that is new to this type of thing is that social networking online, dealing with Facebook or dealing with Twitter and dealing with all the other kinds of things. Those new formulas of public self-presentation are causing a lot of problems out there. You have people that put stuff on Facebook or put stuff out there and typing it into the internet, and a lot of times that causes them problems later on. And it can cause them to lose their jobs, it can cause them to lose their friends, it can cause them to lose their, their significant other, those kinds of things. So that's a lot of times where this whole idea of self-presentation really has begun to become a bigger issue when it comes to what we know as our social self. Okay, another way that we have to learn to deal with ourselves out in the public world is what's known as locus of control. And this is talking about the idea of where do you place the burden or the praise on the behaviors that you do. Do you external or do you internal those types of behaviors? In other words, do you take the blame, do you take the praise, and do you use it internal, and do you external, or do you pull it in internally? And on the form here, on the slide, you can kind of see what it means to be external and internal. And we're going to do an activity over this in class. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. The other one is dealing with what's known as learned helplessness. Now, learned helplessness is dealing with this hopelessness, this resignation idea with humans that we just are out of control. We aren't able to control our events. The world is just going by us. There's no way we can stop it. It's this idea that you have no ability to hold anything together, to stop anything from happening. You feel like everything is just spiraling loose. This oftentimes can lead to depression. It can lead to suicide if it's worse enough. But a lot of times people with this learned helplessness is just that inability to either take on responsibility or care of an action, or a lot of times it also causes a lot of people to have this sense of worthlessness. And it can also cause some other problems. Again, we're going to watch a video on this in class tomorrow, which will kind of explain this a little bit more. Okay, and now we're heading into the next area of the public self, which is what's known as self-serving bias. And self-serving bias is a lot like learned helplessness, but it has a little bit of differences in it as well. It's a tendency to perceive oneself favorably and to excuse our failures of other things. Whereas in learned helplessness, we basically are looking at it more in this context of one-on-one situation where we don't feel like we can have any control over our life. Self-serving bias is where you don't feel like that the control you have is for the things that are doing good. The things that you do bad, you believe that are out of your control and you have no way to deal with it, so it's not your fault at all. It's a tendency to perceive oneself doing more and others doing less a lot of times as well. And there's a study there that was done in which you had 265 households. And basically what they did is they asked both spouses, the husband and wife, who does more of the housework. And in the response that came back, the husbands said that they believed that they did 42% of the work in the household. And the wives, the women, said no. Their response was that most of their husbands only do about 33% of the work. And in actuality, what they found in the study, when they would have observers keep track of who's doing the housework and who's doing the picking up and the cleaning and that, they found that it was actually right around 35%, which is right about in the middle there of the two. And I need to change that there, but of the two. So the husbands believe that they did more, and the women believe that they did less of the work. And that is what self-serving bias is all about. It's where we believe that we are actually do more work. We believe that we are more involved in things. We believe that our significant other or anybody, it could be your boss, it could be a worker, it could be anybody else, does less work. So let's say you have a project and you and your partner are supposed to do a project. Well, I could ask you, how much of the project did you do? And you could tell me, you did 80% of it. I go ask your partner, how much work did you do on the project? And they could say, oh, they only did about 35% of it, and that they did the rest. In actuality, you probably did about 50% each. But that's that perception thing, again, that we believe in. And that can oftentimes lead to problems and lead to arguments. The next one is what's called bias blind spot, which is the failure to see your own negative effects. But it's easy for you to see other people's negative effects. So again, you may be doing some things that are wrong, and you just overlook that, you go past it, you don't care about it, but you see somebody else doing the same thing you're doing, and you believe what they're doing is totally awful and negative. And again, that's just one of those things that our brain blocks us from being able to see that sometimes and being able to be aware of that then. Along with this self-serving bias then, and again, just to go through, self-serving bias is, again, it's a product of how we process and remember information about ourselves. Now, there's good and bad about it. Self-serving bias is not always negative, and I've been kind of leaning on the negatives about self-serving bias here with the presentation, and it does have a lot of negativity. It does have a lot of maladaptive problems with it. It can cause envy, it can cause anger, it can cause a lot of problems. But what it also does for a lot of us by having it is it allows us to protect us from depression. So when I can bounce off something that I've done wrong or something that I've done bad, and I can basically throw it off to the side saying, no, that's not something that big of a deal, it's no big thing, and I can pass it off. That's a way so that I don't feel like I am really doing something that horrible. So it can act as a buffer zone, sort of, to be able to pull away that stress, to pull away that depression from you, to always being able to see, your face in the mirror and see what actually is going on in life. Sometimes we need that blockage, so that way we can kind of bounce back and be able to get ourselves picked back up again. Otherwise, it gets to be a very, very negative process, which then does lead to that learned helplessness. Okay, the last two things we're going to look at here, and we're not going to actually get into the other two slides there, but the last two things we're going to look at here is what's known as false consensus effect and false uniqueness effect. And these are also parts of self-serving bias. False consensus effect is the tendency to overestimate the commonality of one's opinions, and on the other side, to look at the undesirable or unsuccessful behavior, in which we basically then, as we go through that, what the false consensus is basically looking at and dealing with is this idea that you tell a lie, you feel better by saying everybody else does it. So it's this concept that you tend to overestimate the idea that, well, everybody else is doing it, so it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal if I go cheat. It's not that big a deal if I copy somebody else's paper. Everybody else is doing it. We hear that a lot in colleges and stuff. You also hear that a lot at work. You'll have people talk about that. Why did so-and-so steal, from the store and get fired? Well, everybody else in the store was stealing. All the other employees were, so why not? We tend to do that a lot in order to give us justification, to make us feel better about it. And so a lot of times that does cause a lot of problems because we way overestimate a lot of those problems or a lot of those negative things, and our opinions are oftentimes wrong with that. The second thing we do a lot of is what's called false uniqueness, in which, again, we tend to underestimate now the commonality of the things that we're doing, of our abilities or of some of our actions. So again, you could see that you are, maybe you get in the car and you buckle your seatbelt, and you make a statement saying something about how you're the only person that ever does that, nobody else ever does it. Well, in actuality, about 80% of people in the United States buckle their seatbelts. So it's not that what you're doing is unique. It's not what you're doing is grandiose or anything else. But in your mind, you make it think that it's so unique and that you're the only person who has that ability or that successfulness to be able to do that. And in actuality, everybody else is doing it too. But again, it gives you that idea. Even though it's a falsehood, it gives you that a little bit of clarity. It may give you a little bit of self-pumping up, of making you feel better about yourself, at least for the short term. There's a lot of adaptive good things about having these concepts or having these effects, but again, on the other side, it can cause a lot of maladaptive behavior, because then if you overextend it into thinking that what you're doing is just so grandiose and so superior over everybody else, it can lead to start eating into new falsism, and that leads to narcissism. And we have to be, again, careful about that. So these are all different types of self-serving bias, and again, there's a fine line there between doing these self-serving biases as an adaptive behavior, in which it gives you that idea to get away from the depression, or it helps you release some stress. But there's also that negativity that can cause a lot of problems as well. This is going to end the presentation. The next two slides that we're not going to go through here on the presentation, but we'll go through in class then. One's an activity, and then the other one's going to kind of finish up talking about this concept of optimism and pessimism.